When NAD levels are high, there's an abundance of NAD, which means there's abundance of fuel for the sirtuins. They're getting activated. Lots of the repair and pathways, etc., and genes are all getting switched on, and you get these longevity and aging.
So I'm really excited to have Dr. Nichola Conlon here today to talk all about NAD and optimizing longevity. We haven't actually had anyone on the podcast yet talk about this, Nichola. So I think it's going to be a popular topic. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Angela. I'm excited to be here to be able to talk all about it with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share all about it because I think, many listeners actually listening to this will know and be familiar, but they'll be researching lots of different supplements and different mechanisms that they can use and things like fasting to activate those pathways. And then there'll be other people listening who probably haven't heard of NAD or what it is. So I think probably the best place to start is there. Can you kind of give a brief synopsis of what NAD is and why it's so important for the human body?
Yes, absolutely. I can give you a bit of an NAD 101 to begin with. So NAD, I sometimes refer to it as probably the most important molecule that you've never heard of. And that's because if you didn't have NAD in your body, you'd literally be dead within 30 seconds because it plays some really critical roles within our cells. The first one is that it's incredibly important for energy production in our cells. And this is because NAD is part of the Krebs cycle, which is a cycle within our mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses of our cells, which actually make cellular energy. And without NAD, our cells literally couldn't do this. The pathway wouldn't actually work. So that's one really important role for NAD, which is energy production. The other side is that NAD actually acts as a kind of signaling molecule in the cell where it senses the levels of energy in our cell and then causes reactions which allow our cells to react appropriately to the levels of energy in the cells. So when we have high levels of NAD, it actually signals to the cells that cellular maintenance and repair needs to be switched on. So lots of pathways are activated that keep our cells in good health. And when NAD levels are low, that means the cell's kind of got a lot of energy. It doesn't really need to be as resourceful, and cellular maintenance and repair can kind of be turned down. So these fluctuating levels of NAD in the cells kind of control cellular maintenance and repair being switched on and switched off. So they are the sort of key things that NAD is really known for and really important for.
And my understanding is, and I think you share this research actually on your website, is that it's sort of halves every 20 years. So, and when is that from? So for example, I've got teenage children and a younger one. They presumably their NAD pathways are working really super well, and the salvage pathway, which we can come on to in a moment. When does this process start to begin? Like, when should people start to think about this?
From research that's been done, it seems like it declines from birth. Okay. So by the time you're age 20, you've kind of got half the amounts of NAD that you had when you were born in various different tissues. So that's quite significant to think that, by the time we're 20, it's halved, that's going to half again, that's going to half again. And what you see in tissues from humans and all sorts of mammals is that it does significantly decline. So it's like an exponential decline where, it's half and again, half and again. And this is a real problem because this NAD decline that we actually suffer with age is actually being found to reduce, first of all, our energy levels because our mitochondria can't function as well without NAD. And also it means that these beneficial maintenance and repair pathways in the cell are also getting turned down. So if they're getting turned down, damage is accumulating within the cells. And this sort of manifests as the signs and symptoms that we associate with aging. So it's thought that this decline in NAD with age does actually play a big role in our experience of aging.
And when we look at people who are doing things like intermittent fasting, which can help to upregulate that pathway, there's the sort of differences. So I think people listening that do intermittent fasting, putting aside kind of the female menstrual cycle and whether women should be fasting as long, if we think more generally, is there an optimal period of fasting on a daily basis or an intermittent basis that we should be looking at to try and seek to upregulate that pathway?
I think what's known is that any level of fasting really is going to start to actually increase your NAD levels. And that's because basically NAD is acting as the link between some of the pathways that sense an energy stress, which at the end of the day is what you're trying to create with fasting, and then the downstream pathways that are activated. So when you fast, so, say you've gone for 12, 16 hours without food, what happens is something in your cells called AMPK is activated. And that's like your cellular energy sensor. And that almost goes off like an alarm saying, okay, there's no energy coming into the body. We're going to have to make sure the body's resourceful and it's not wasteful, and it holds on to whatever energy and resources that it has. So AMPK actually upregulates NAD levels. And then this rise in NAD is sensed by the cell, and that is what activates multiple downstream pathways. So anything that you're doing, it's been to sort of create an energy stress in the body, has been found to positively impact NAD levels. So that's everything from intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, to exercise. So exercise is a well-known way to actually boost NAD levels. So in general, anything that's creating that stress, that little bit of stress, that homeostasis in the body, actually beneficially impacts your NAD levels.
And so because I was reading some research as well, like with doing kind of high intensity interval training, for example, has been shown to upregulate that pathway. And so I think for people listening, we just came off actually in my membership a metabolic flexibility month, and quite a few people there were tracking their flexibility with the Lumen device, for example. And that device will actually sort of give you an indication if you've moved fully into fat burning mode and you've depleted liver glycogen. Then the recommendation that's made is if you're going to go and do a high intensity interval training session, you're probably going to have better output if you preload with a little bit of carbohydrates to fuel that session. But when we're looking at this from activating those pathways and AMPK, it would seem that actually going and doing that exercise in a fasted state would be creating more positive stress in terms of hormetic stress on the body to upregulate this further.
Yeah, absolutely. And personally, that's what I do. I do all my exercise in a fasted state in the morning. And, so in that way, you're sort of prolonging and emphasizing that AMPK activation. And AMPK, that actually activates critical enzymes within the cell that actually produce NAD. So you're fundamentally altering the cell's ability to actually make more NAD and have it available to activate the beneficial downstream pathways.
And yeah, it's interesting because that's what I do as well. I like to go and do it fasted for that reason. And I think the other thing I wanted to share, which I've heard you talk about before as well, and that you could go into for listeners, is this is something that the body generally has what it needs, right? But it needs to activate that pathway itself. There is a little bit of and we can talk about that in a moment, in terms of bringing outside nutrients in, but it has a mechanism for recycling. Could you just explain that before we go into things that are complementary to help there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of, NAD's been a popular thing within the scientific field for quite a while now, but the science is really changing in terms of what we understand about NAD production and also decline in the body. And one of the major things that's changed is our understanding of first of all, how our body produces NAD and why it's depleted. And it's been found that the major way that our body actually makes NAD is actually by recycling it. So it has a pathway called the salvage pathway in most cells, where when NAD is actually used by the body, so when it's used by enzymes and pathways, it actually gets broken down into some of its fundamental components, which are called precursors. And the main precursor which NAD gets broken down into is something called nicotinamide. Now, in young cells, they have this amazing capacity to be able to recycle that breakdown product, that nicotinamide, straight back into useful NAD again. And this is called the salvage pathway. And the majority of our NAD is actually made in this way when we're young. And if you think about it, it makes complete sense because NAD is so critical for the body. why would the body want to rely on having to have some sort of external nutrient to make this NAD? It needs to have almost a fail-safe mechanism to be able to continually supply the cell with NAD no matter how much it's using. So when we're young, NAD is used up, it's broken down into nicotinamide, and the salvage pathway literally salvages it and recycles it straight back into fresh NAD that can be then used again for all the repair, the maintenance, the mitochondrial function, and keeps getting recycled. Now, the issue is that it's been found that our NAD levels mainly decline because this becomes dysregulated with age. And the salvage pathway in older cells simply doesn't work as well. And the reason is because the main rate limiting enzyme in this pathway, an enzyme called NAMPT, actually declines with age. So if you take a sample of someone's cells who is older, you will find that they simply do not have as much of this NAMPT enzyme. So what that means is in older cells, where they are using up the NAD and breaking it down into the waste product, nicotinamide, it's just not getting recycled. So cells are using it, but it's not getting replenished like it should be. And that's a really important thing to bear in mind when you're looking at, restoring NAD levels or trying to impact NAD in any way. And just to emphasize how important that pathway is, remember we were just talking about how fasting and exercise all increase the production of NAD. Well, the way they do this is by directly increasing levels of this enzyme NAMPT. So all the beneficial effects of exercise, fasting, etc., are happening because they're increasing the ability of our cells to use this salvage pathway.
Interesting. So we're and actually it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look ancestrally, we would have actually had to be doing by necessity a lot of these things, right? Food wouldn't have always been super readily available, and definitely not the processed food that we have an abundance of at the moment. We would have also had to work quite hard and exercise in a fasted state to get it. I always think, like, even when you look at things like nature's sweeteners, right? We wouldn't have eaten tons and tons of honey because it's actually really hard to get hold of, and you're going to get stung to get it and have to climb. It's quite interesting. And we would have been like cold swimming or bathing, right, in a lake or a river, and having that cold exposure, and we wouldn't have had central heating to keep us warm. So presumably we actually would have been a lot better at activating those pathways naturally than we are today, when a lot of people are in a highly fed state most of the time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And something that I say all the time is that if you want to make sense of aging and aging biology, just look at it through the perspective of evolution. Everything in aging starts to make sense when you look at it of why we've evolved to be the way we are. All the pathways, all the things that go wrong with age. It's all because we've evolved, to live more like our ancestors. And then suddenly we've had these huge lifestyle changes in the last 200 years. It's really, really short time frame. And in terms of evolution and how our bodies can evolve and change, our bodies aren't designed to live the way we're living today. They're designed to go with long periods without food. They're designed to be, hunting down food and using a lot of energy, and actually really going into a state of energy stress where these cellular repair, recycling, autophagy, DNA repair, things like that are activated to keep our cells in good health. But unfortunately, we just click a button on our apps on our phones and order some food and don't have to move. So our cells aren't having a chance to go into this energy stress state, which is activating, NAD production and activating all the beneficial downstream pathways.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? And also we would have had exposure to, I guess, to more things like wild plants that are growing, which again have these hormetic compounds within them, right? Things like resveratrol, which I want to come on to in a moment. I think the other thing as well is when people are eating a highly processed diet, presumably they're using more NAD and their pathways are not working as effectively. So they would be aging at a much faster rate, right? as opposed to if you took two individuals, somebody who is highly sedentary at work, maybe travels by car to the office, gets food, orders Deliveroo, eats most of the day up until they go to bed, probably is quite stressed, doesn't sleep very well, versus somebody who is fasting, maybe going out for a morning walk, moving around through the day, eating an abundance of kind of plant-based diet and things like that, they're going to look quite different internally.
Yeah, absolutely. You can almost bet they will have lower NAD levels. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, the things that they're doing in their lifestyle is ultimately going to cause more damage, more chronic inflammation, more oxidative stress, all of which are things that need repair. And that repair is driven ultimately a lot by NAD. So they're going to be having a higher demand for NAD in their body, which means it's going to be getting used up. At the same time, they aren't putting that stress on their body. They aren't activating those pathways that are actually promoting its salvage and recycling. So you've almost got the perfect storm where you've got this increased demand, and at the same time you've got a decreased production and recycling. So ultimately levels fall, and you tend to see that not only in people with poor lifestyle choices, especially younger people with poor lifestyle choices, but naturally as we get older, this is generally what's happening. And you could take a fit, healthy 60-year-old and they could have all right NAD levels. They will have lower, but due to their lifestyle practices, they could have quite good NAD levels. And you could take a 30-year-old who's overweight, has metabolic disease and pre-diabetes, things from having a poor lifestyle, who's probably got just as low NAD as you would expect in a healthy older person. So lifestyle massively impacts NAD levels. Metabolic syndrome, if you look at people's samples who have some form of metabolic disease, whether that's diabetes, fatty liver, they are characterized by low NAD levels and also low NAMPT levels, that enzyme that's critical for the salvage pathway. And there's a lot of evidence to show that some of these diseases can actually be really reversed or made significantly better by actually elevating NAD through some quite simple mechanisms.
And what about other things? Like I saw some research that NAD may show promise with things like treating cancer. Do you think, obviously like cancer, that there is damage, right, to the DNA and to the cells themselves. Do you think that, is it categorized that in people that have cancer, do we see NAD levels that are lower in things like chronic fatigue, for example, which is really a mitochondrial disorder? And also, I suppose another question would be, we're seeing such a rise in autoimmune disorders as well. Is there any link between NAD and some of the autoimmune diseases we're seeing?
Yeah, NAD has been implicated in all of the things that you've just mentioned. And I guess it's no surprise because NAD is in every cell in the body, and it's involved in so many different pathways. I think in terms of NAD and cancer, so NAD is and cancer, incidence of cancer are inversely correlated. So what you see is as NAD levels decline, incidence of cancer goes up. And this is directly because NAD is so important for DNA repair. Some of the critical DNA repair enzymes are actually fueled by using NAD as a cofactor, which means that if they don't have NAD, they simply can't work. And obviously a leading cause of cancer is DNA damage and mutations that, then cause uncontrollable cell growth. So it's, having high NAD levels is definitely something for cancer prevention. To make sure that you've got adequate repair to ensure that cells don't become malignant. On the flip side, a lot of treatments, specific cancer treatments, are looking at trying to inhibit NAD, but only specifically in cancer cells. And that is because NAD is so critical to any cell to be able to work and function, that one of the ways of trying to get rid of cells you don't want is by cutting off the supply of something that's beneficial. So a lot of anti-cancer drugs will try to cut off DNA repair enzymes, or cut off supplies of oxygen or glucose or whatever it is that the cells are reliant on. And again, that's something that NAD has been researched for. And sometimes people wrongly interpret that as like, oh, well, NAD must cause cancer. But that's absolutely not the case. What all the evidence shows is that NAD is beneficial to a cancer cell, just as it is a normal cell. So, one of the ways to try and get rid of cancer cells is to restrict that useful thing in the same way that they do with restricting DNA repair. But nobody would say that, oh, well, we better not have any DNA repair in the body, because what happens if it benefits a cancer cell? So that's a bit of a common misunderstanding within this field, especially by people who are just starting to understand it. But in a lot of diseases, NAD has been implicated. Neurodegeneration is another huge one. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, they're again characterized by low levels of NAD, and actually by restoring NAD levels, there's been trials that have demonstrated a significant benefit. So I think it's a really, really exciting area to be involved in.
It's really exciting. I mean, so if somebody was, for example, that maybe they find that they are more like genetically predisposed to cancer for whatever reason, or there's a familial history of it, or in fact they have experienced cancer themselves. I'm going to come on to the kind of things that they can take in terms of supplements in a moment with you, but would there be a downside to those individuals or people that are receiving any kind of treatment? Because obviously it's upregulating both sets of cells, right? The good ones and the bad ones. Are there any circumstances where people should be cautious about what they're taking?
I think if somebody knew they actively had cancer, then personally I would be cautious. But aside from that very specific circumstance, the benefit of having high NAD massively outweighs any potential risk, of any other reason why you shouldn't be taking it. NAD and cancer, like I say, are inversely correlated. When we're young, we have super high levels of NAD, that's very well known, and we also have the lowest risk of cancer. However, as that shift changes as we get older, there's, it's not a coincidence that older people who have lower levels of NAD have much higher incidence of cancer risk. And that's because the repair's not happening, the inflammation's there, all of these things that create the right environment for cancer to grow. But NAD actually prevents all of those situations from happening in the first place. So, having high NAD is actually, more looked at as a way to avoid getting into that situation in the first place.
Interesting. And what about in terms of like increasing and optimizing our own levels and those pathways? Let's say somebody has, maybe not been living the ideal lifestyle, the ideal diet for a few years, and now they're starting to think about this. Are we really just protecting downside here in terms of what we can do, or can we actually boost things and begin to reverse our biological age?
Yeah, absolutely. So biological age, it's something I love talking about, because unfortunately most people have this mindset that our age is set. We're getting older, it's inevitable, there's nothing we can do about it. But what biological age has shown, which is, the age that you actually are within your cells, as opposed to how many candles you have on the birthday cake, biological age is reversible. And there's a lot of studies now that have demonstrated that this is something that you can impact with some, quite frankly, very simple lifestyle changes, and you can have a major impact. So yeah, I think NAD again is linked to the health of your cells, which is ultimately linked to the biological age of your cells.
Perfect. It's exciting, isn't it? It's a really exciting area.
And we've actually done a clinical study on our product where we've measured biological age before and after. So it'll be exciting to be able to talk about the results of that at some point in the future.
And is that a recent study? Because there is also a study on your website, isn't there? Is that a more recent one that you've just done now? Or?
Yeah, so we did an initial pilot study with a couple of people, but we've done a bigger double-blinded placebo-controlled crossover with 24 people now, and those people all had the biological age tested before and after.
Interesting. And when you're measuring their biological age, what markers are you using? Because I know there's a range of different things that you can look at.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different ways. I mean, what we used was something called a glycan age, which is measuring basically glycans are little sugars that are markers that are stuck on the surface of your immune cells. And basically the patterns of these markers change quite predictably as you get older. So you can take someone's sample and predict within a couple of years how old they are by just simply looking at the pattern of these glycan markers. So that was the way we did it for this study, but there are also other ways like looking at epigenetics. So that's again looking at patterns of markers, but this time patterns of markers that are stuck onto our DNA and our genes that affect a gene expression. There's other things like telomeres, which are a little bit controversial, but you can use that to measure biological age. But I think ultimately the best way is a combination of multiple in the future when things become more established. But at the minute we used glycan age because that's one that we believe has some really robust science behind it.
And what kind of reversal were you seeing?
So it's a double-blinded study and it hasn't been unblinded yet.
Okay. So we
have seen something happen. So hopefully when it's unblinded,
talk about it more.
It's not the placebo.
Yeah. Okay. Exciting. Can we talk as well, before we come on to supplementation, which I do want to talk about, to talk about sirtuins and also like things like NMN, for example. Yeah. And what people should be thinking about here, because I think people get really confused and you can end up spending a lot of money and not actually getting what you need.
Yes. Okay. First question, sirtuins. So the sirtuins are, they always go hand in hand and are mentioned with NAD. And that's because the sirtuins are a group of longevity proteins or enzymes that basically they sit like at the top of a cascade that switches on a lot of downstream beneficial pathways and that are involved in longevity, they're involved in repair, they're involved in basically, you name it, if it's good for aging and longevity, the sirtuins somehow are involved. The reason that they are linked to NAD is that they are absolutely critically dependent on NAD to function. So the sirtuin is essentially an enzyme, and it needs a fuel to power the enzyme, and NAD is that fuel. So what you find is that when NAD levels decline, the reason that all that cellular maintenance and repair gets switched off is because there's not enough NAD to switch on the sirtuins, which are then coordinating this cascade of beneficial pathways. Conversely, when NAD levels are high, there's an abundance of NAD, which means there's abundance of fuel for the sirtuins. They're getting activated. Lots of the repair and pathways, etc., and genes are all getting switched on, and you get these longevity and aging benefits. So that's where sirtuins.
Can I ask a question on that then? So in terms of the sirtuins, so because we can have sirtuin activating compounds in our diet, right? And a lot of people have heard about things like the SIRT diet, and things like resveratrol and fisetin and like matcha and things like that they can start having. But if that NAD salvage pathway is not operating correctly, then you could be consuming lots of sirtuin enhancing compounds, but actually not making a difference, presumably. You've got to have both.
Absolutely. So you can take all the resveratrol in the world, but if you've got no NAD, it's absolutely pointless. Yes.
So you could be really overweight, eating a highly processed diet and drink matcha green tea all day long and have absolutely no... You might get some
it will have other benefits.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not going to work on that pathway properly.
Absolutely not. Okay. So they act on a different site. They sort of work in a different way to benefit the sirtuins, but ultimately sirtuins cannot perform their chemical reaction that they perform without NAD. It's absolutely critical.
Okay, interesting. So it really is a combination of nutrition, supplementation, lifestyle, that magic's got to happen. Before we come on then to the supplementary aspect, I know that circadian rhythm also plays a part here. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so NAD is heavily involved in regulating your circadian rhythm. So actually, if you think your circadian rhythm regulates, your sleep-wake cycles, your hormones, your metabolism, everything, and it peaks and troughs in this 24-hour cycle. If you measure NAD levels, NAD also goes up and down and peaks and troughs in the circadian way, but it's sort of slightly offset from your circadian rhythm, and that's because levels of NAD actually switch on and off some of the basically the pathways that, for example, manufacture melatonin, and switch on some of the pathways that alter your hormones and in your cortisol and other things that are involved in those rhythms throughout the day. So as you get older, if your NAD levels are declining and you're not having that, that pronounced fluctuation in NAD levels throughout the day, that then also goes on to impact circadian rhythms, because it means that the NAD is not driving some of the pathways that switch on and off the melatonin production and everything else. So you can also see a suppression in the, how pronounced those rhythms are as well. So what you find is in that people who actually have youthful levels of NAD, the circadian rhythm stronger than in people that have lower levels of NAD. That's when it starts to get toned down, and then people have sleep issues and other issues associated with that.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people just accept that as a part of getting older, right? Just a standard part, that you're going to be sleeping shorter, less deep sleep. But actually, by working on these pathways, you can improve that as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people think, well, NAD is just this constant thing. It's a constant level. It's not. It goes up and down throughout the day. It fluctuates. NAD by its, it's naturally made to sort of rise and fall. It's this sensor. So NAD is not like this linear thing in the cell or in the body.
Okay, interesting. And what about NAD levels? Is there any research showing how they might flucturate around a woman's menstrual cycle, for example?
No, not that I've come across, but would be, it's a super interesting area, looking at how hormones and things like that are influencing NAD levels. And I'd be very surprised if something didn't come out, soon with some research on this.
Yeah, it would be really interesting, because when you think how that kind of affects sleep and the vagus nerve and things like that as well, it's quite interesting. Okay, so then looking at supplementation, because I think this is where people get confused.
Yes.
And, on the one hand, you've got a range of different supplements that seem to be, made of they have different compositions, which I want to go into yours that you've formulated and tested. But also then people like, for example, Dr. Nichola has come out and said, you don't need to be spending a ton of money on this. Actually, you can just take high doses of niacin. But my understanding is that if you're not optimizing that pathway, you could take loads and loads of niacin. It's not going to make a huge difference, but you're the expert here. So if you could explain that would be really helpful, because I think people will wonder, is this going to work for me?
Absolutely. And I appreciate that it is a difficult area to get your head around. And there is a lot of conflicting advice, even, throughout the scientific community. There's a lot of argument over what's best. So, what I base our research on is what the latest science actually is and what it shows of why NAD is declining and what the root causes are. So in terms of boosting NAD levels, there are a few ways that people have probably heard of. One way, which I definitely don't recommend, is taking pure NAD in capsules. And that is because NAD is a very unstable molecule. So if it's just a pure, NAD plus or NADH or whatever in a capsule, there is no way that it will go through your gut and survive and get anywhere in the form that it's needed. So that's a definite no-no. The way that people have tried to get around this is by supplementing with what we call precursors. So these are the building blocks that the cell uses to make NAD. The common ones that people will know are the B vitamins like niacin, niacinamide, nicotinamide. And then you've got NR, which is nicotinamide riboside, and then you've got NMN, which is nicotinamide mononucleotide. And the majority of people seem to, have heard of these types of ways to boost NAD. Now, the way they work is they are just building blocks that the cell basically uses to make NAD. The issue with taking these is whilst they do boost NAD by around 40 to 60%, that's in the published clinical studies, they're absolutely ignoring the reasons why NAD is declining. So I always get people to think of this as a bit of a factory scenario. So if you think of your cells as a factory that's producing NAD, because that's essentially what they are, and production goes down in that factory, how do you try to boost production again? Would you just say, oh, production's gone down, so we'll just order more raw material and hope that it gets converted into, it gets made into NAD? When actually, if you took a closer look, what you realized is that the reason production's down is because the machines are broken, because there's no staff, because the pipes are leaking. Would you still think that it's a good idea just to order more raw material and hope for the best? No, probably not. You'd probably say, well, we could do a lot better job if we, employed more staff, if we fixed the machines and we plugged the leaking pipes. So this is where we say the best way to actually boost NAD levels is to have a whole system approach and really look at the root causes of NAD and what's going wrong. And the main root causes of NAD is because the salvage pathway isn't working as well. So what can you do to actually boost your salvage pathway to increase levels of that NAMPT enzyme so that when there are precursors in the cell, when there is NAD in the cell, it can actually keep getting used and recycled rather than just, taking in more precursor and it's not actually getting converted to NAD in the first place. The other thing is, look at the processes that are wasting NAD, because the other reason that NAD declines is because when we get older, you get a huge change in the cells and the way that they use an NAD. One of the key ones is chronic low-level inflammation. That is something that we know people suffer with as they get older, having this low-level, low-grade inflammation. And that's known to cause the overexpression of something called CD38 in our cells. And basically, CD38 is an enzyme that just drains NAD. It just sucks it out of the cells unnecessarily. And so just by inhibiting CD38 just a little bit, you can actually boost NAD levels. So again, this is like looking at what the root causes are in the cell that are causing this decline and then actually fix them. And
how would you inhibit CD38?
You can use apigenin. So this is a compound, it's commonly found in parsley, and you can use apigenin. And there's studies to show in cells in vitro that if you inhibit CD38, even just by a very small amount with apigenin, you can actually boost NAD levels by 50%.
Wow.
Just by getting rid of the waste. So this is just as good as using a precursor. So can you imagine what happens if you take a whole system approach and you actually, you have a precursor, so you've got some of that raw material available, you inhibit these wasteful processes and you activate NAMPT, you're basically fixing all the issues and you're restoring the cell's ability to be able to make and use and recycle its own NAD again, like it did when it was younger. And I guess that's exactly the approach we've taken. And when we've took this approach with our product, we find that it boosts NAD a lot better than just using a precursor. So in terms of numbers, in our pilot study, it boosted NAD by 242% over 16 days, which is a lot better than 40 to 60%.
And over 16 days, which is really quick, which is interesting. And when you're looking at, because this is the other thing that I think people can get confused over, is when Dr. David Sinclair talks, he's got like a bucket of NMN in his basement. He's taking very high quantities. A lot of samples you look at, supplements that you buy, they're tiny amounts of this. When you formulated Nuchido, how have you optimized the levels there? Because I know, like, I've been taking it and I've definitely seen, what I've noticed is improvements in energy. how is that formulated to do that, if you see what I mean? In terms of the levels, how do people know that they're getting enough of what they need because of the research you've done, presumably?
Yes. You just froze slightly there, but I think I got the gist of the question, which was that how do we optimize the levels of ingredients that go into the product to be able to have the effect?
Yeah, because I know you've specially formulated yours. You've done your
Correct.
own research and it's based on solid research. But when people are looking at it, because sometimes you'll hear like Dr. David Sinclair talking about how much NMN he takes, and then he's taking, he's got a bucket in his basement, and then other companies have got samples, but they're tiny, tiny amounts. And I think that's where people can get really confused as well, as over how much they should be taking. Did you hear me, Nichola?
Sorry, my internet is just, can you hear me?
Don't worry. Yeah, I can ask it again. Let me ask it again.
Yeah, I think it's sorting itself out. Just maybe give it a second. Sorry.
No worries at all.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I think am I freezing? Am I?
Yeah, but I think it is on my end though. I think we're fine now. I'll just continue and answer it like you've just asked the question, okay?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. I can hear you fine.
Yeah, so when basically it's all to do with my background. So before I founded Nuchido, I actually worked in drug development. And before that, my PhD was actually in the bioavailability and pharmacokinetics of drugs and nutrients. So that's something I'm incredibly passionate about, is actually understanding how much of something has to go into an oral formulation to be able to go through the gut and the liver, etc., and actually end up in the cells at a concentration that will actually have some efficacy within the cells. So when formulating our product, that was a huge amount of work to get the right levels of the ingredients and also the right combination of the ingredients, because within our product, unlike NMN or NR, it's not just one ingredient. It's not just a simple precursor. It's got a precursor in there. We actually use nicotinamide, which is one of the B vitamins. The reason we use that is because nicotinamide freely diffuses through cell membranes. It doesn't rely on a transporter to get it through, unlike NR and NMN, which can't actually access all cells in the body. The other ingredients in there, they've all been selected based on the most bioavailable forms. So we mentioned apigenin earlier. Apigenin, if you took that in its pure, chemically synthesized form, shall we say, the bioavailability is actually very poor. However, if you take it in a format that's a bit more natural, such as parsley powder, which is what we actually include in our product, it's readily absorbed by the body, and then the apigenin is actually released once it's been absorbed, and then it's actually in a more useful form in the body. So that's why we see that it does indeed get into the cells intact in the way that we need it to do that.
Interesting. I was just looking at the ingredients there in it, and then you've got alpha lipoic acid as well in there, which I can see helps to activate AMPK, but that also is like an antioxidant in itself, right? And also helps regulate blood sugar, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I mean, ALA does a multitude of different things. The reason it's in our product is it's an activator of AMPK, which, as we discussed earlier, is incredibly important for activating the salvage pathway. The other thing that alpha lipoic acid does is it activates another enzyme called NQO1. And basically what this does is it flips NAD between its two states. So NAD can either exist as NAD plus, which is the oxidized form, or NADH, which is the reduced form. And what we find is that if you activate NQO1, it pushes the ratio of NAD plus to NADH towards NAD plus. which is the more favorable direction. Whereas as you get older, it tends to drift towards NADH, which is not a favorable ratio. So ALA also works within this capacity as well to improve NAD levels.
How interesting. And what about, you were talking about the circadian aspect in terms of the way NAD, this pathway works in the body. Is there an optimal time of day to take this supplement? Because when I've been taking it, it says take 3 capsules twice a day. And I think when we chatted at the Health Optimization Summit, you were saying just be cautious around taking it towards bedtime. But I was just curious, like if you can take it nearer to bedtime, is there any evidence that it would be better, like when the body's doing its repair work, for example?
I think what we suggest doing is taking 3 capsules in the morning. And the reason for this is generally in the morning, people are in a fasted state. And as we know that the formulation has AMPK activators in, this is another way of almost prolonging that fasted state for a bit longer, even though you're going to be eating it with your breakfast or your first meal of the day. It's a way of keeping that stress, that signal to boost NAD levels kept on a little bit longer, even though you've almost stopped the fast. So we would recommend starting it in the morning. And then again, we recommend taking it with your second meal of the day. Again, it's just, if you're eating, that's naturally going to decline your NAD levels. And what we'll want to do is keep them high. So, when nutrients comes in the body, that's telling the body, well, there's no energy stress anymore. Turn down AMPK, turn down NAD production. And what we're trying to do is keep the levels high. So we recommend just taking with food, with your first meal of the day. Again, 4 to 6 hours later.
Would there be any downside to then taking it again in the evening and taking 9 capsules?
We don't recommend going up to 9 capsules just because all the safety testing that we've done is on the 6 capsules. Also, the levels of the ingredients that are within our product are actually pretty high. Some of them are, at the max that you'd want to be taking. And again, some people say, oh my goodness, like it's 6 capsules. And it's like, yeah, because that's what works. And, a lot of people don't realize that the levels of, nutrients and vitamins and things that you actually need to be taking are way more than what are often prescribed on the tub of a lot of the things that you see in the pharmacy, which simply don't work because there's not enough of the good stuff in there to actually get through the gut and through the liver and then to where it needs to do its, do the magic.
But they do need to be taken with food. Is that for digestive reasons or?
We recommend taking with food. The reason being is that some people don't tolerate taking, multiple different tablets on an empty stomach. We appreciate that a lot of people that are taking our product perhaps practice fasting, and therefore we just say just take it with your food, and therefore you'll just avoid ever feeling nauseous or anything like that. And when we've looked at whether it should be taken with or without food, it didn't matter. So just to avoid any risk of nausea,
so you still get the same effects,
anything like that, just take it with food.
Okay, amazing. So you still get the same effects.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have a discount code that you're going to share for listeners. I think it's my name, isn't it? Is it Angela Temba? We'll put it in the show notes in case those of you listening. I'm really enjoying, and actually I'm going to be testing my biological age soon, so it'll be fun. And I've definitely seen what I would say is an uptick in energy. I guess one question I have for people that are going to take this, if they're taking any kind of B complex, should they then stop taking that while taking this supplement?
Yeah, all we'd recommend is if you're taking any sort of form of vitamin B3, that you don't need to take it because you're going to be getting it entirely out of our product. Just have a look through the ingredients list, especially for people that take huge amounts of different supplements. Check that there's no overlap with any of the ingredients. But a lot of our customers are people that were previously taking NR, or they were previously taking NMN, and they've swapped to using our product because they understand the value it has in actually fixing the root causes of the NAD decline. And as you said, you've experienced an uplift in energy, and a lot of people do report that, which for us isn't surprising, because it's actually fixing these energy problems in the cells and fixing the repair and things like that. All our clinical data shows that we've got studies to show it is actually doing what we say it is doing in the cells. We can see, and we've done Western blot analysis, which shows it does upregulate NAMPT, which again, NMN and the B vitamins don't do alone. So there is an added benefit of going the extra mile and using an approach that is fixing the root causes of NAD decline. But the other types of benefits that people feel aren't just physical energy, but actually mental energy. Brain fog, especially in women who are going through perimenopause, menopause. That's a huge area of feedback we get from our customers, saying how it's massively helped with the mental clarity and sharpness that they'd unfortunately felt like they just didn't have it. So I think that's another area for people to look out for. And also, as we've mentioned, sleep. A lot of our customers report much better sleep and sleep quality. And if they've got a Oura ring or a Whoop strap or anything like that, a lot of them often track it and again report improvements in the quality.
Amazing. And do you recommend just taking this on an ongoing basis, just every month, or is it something that you would cycle on and off of?
We recommend, it's something that you can take on an ongoing basis. NAD can be viewed as an investment in your cellular health. Again, it's like one of those things that you can proactively do to actually keep yourself in good health, rather than having to try and fix things later on. So it's something you can take on an ongoing basis. I think we do have some customers that say, they're doing everything else for their health. They're doing the exercises, doing the fasting. So maybe they'll just take it when they feel like they need that extra support for one reason or another. But in general, the majority of our customers are on an ongoing subscription because they feel the benefits, and when they've stopped, they've noticed.
Oh, amazing! But there's no advantage to saying I'm going to take it for 10 months of the year and then cycle off for 2 and come back again and take it, just to give your body, for example, any kind of break where it's having to do this on its own without a bunch of precursors. What you're saying is actually, no, you can just take it on a continual basis.
Yeah, not that we're aware of. From all the results and studies that we've done, taking it on an ongoing basis to ensure that, for example, CD38 is continually being inhibited, so that it's not wasting NAD, and to ensure that you've got, increased activation of AMPK and the NAMPT enzyme. It's all something that just keeps going down with age. Therefore, you've got to proactively keep trying to keep it up with age. It's not something that's a temporary thing.
Is it only suitable for 18 plus? Is it for adults?
Yeah, because that's all we've tested it on in our clinical studies and our safety studies.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much. I know people listening are going to be really, really excited by this and want to go and find out more. So we will link to your website, nuchido.com. But where can people come and find you, Nichola? I know you're pretty active on social media and just connect with you.
Yeah, the best place to find me is on Instagram, and it's just at Dr. Nichola Conlon, which you can add in the notes. But although we've spoke about NAD today, my background is in aging well in general and cellular aging. So I tend to speak about a lot of other areas and aspects of aging if anyone's interested.
Yeah, you do share some exciting posts. I think I've seen you having. You were having, what was it yesterday? I saw you having an infusion of sorts. Was it?
Yes. Ozone therapy.
Ozone therapy. That was it. Yeah. So if you want to find out more about longevity definitely go and head over and check out Dr. Nichola Conlon on Instagram. It's a fun account over there. And thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing all your expertise. It's just been amazing to kind of just download all that knowledge on longevity from you. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much for inviting me, Angela. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you.